The morning mist drifted in over the moor's edge, thick like milk spilled over cracked slate, and the iron gate creaked open. There was a subtle hum of electric tension behind Ashdown Hall's training stables. Cameras inside the pen captured the glimmer of defiance in a wild stallion's eyes, the flick of a scarred tail, and the twitch of a battered flank. Bracken remained motionless, his chest heaving and his knees braced. He didn't flinch as the whip cracked once. A second, sharper tug on the rope halter. As the handler yelled off camera, he reared, hoofs scuffing the pen's wooden slats. Now hold him down? His neck was bitten by the rope. Bracken flailed. The screen turned dark. The video concluded just as it had begun, devoid of any background information but unavoidable. Mia Whitfield silently gazed at her laptop. There was no signature on the email. The topic line has just one GPS coordinate. A 45-second video is attached. No sender information, watermark, or introduction. Just unvarnished, horrible video. Rubbing her palm over the scar close to her knuckle, she swallowed forcefully, a remembrance from another horse, another time, another tale. However, Bracken. This was not like the others. There was no panic here. This was a demonstration. His eyes had been filled with rage rather than fear. She took one look out the window. Over the undulating hills of Devon, the light was just beginning to rise. In the distance, the heather and mist tangle of the moorland yawned open. The coordinates were near. Not 5 miles. Water, dried apples, a first aid kit, a field camera, and a notepad were all in her pack, which she checked. She put on a wet jacket, and picked up her cannon. Her breath mingled with the gravel outside her boots. She could hardly feel the cold seeping into her sleeves. With its well-kept gardens, wrought iron gates, and centuries-old elite pedigree, Ashdown Hall had always loomed like a half-whispered legend. The estate had been transformed into a horse training facility by Lady Beatrice Ashdown, complete with private pens and behavioral recalibration programs. It all sounded humane on paper, organized, sophisticated, and expert. Mia, however, had heard tales. Near the woods, locals whispered about late-night lights, short-lived trainers, and horses that arrived with pride and left broken. This video comes next. The land descended toward a secret clearing at the coordinates, sandwiched between a windswept gorse patch and an ancient stone wall. Fresh hoof prints scribbled the mud, but there was no fence, no camera, and no sign. A piece of frayed rope hung from a corroded stake, and a feed bucket was sideways on the grass. Mia squatted and brushed the reeds away. On a neighboring rock, she noticed a dark smudge that was small but red enough to make her stomach turn. Blood? The fog snaking around the ridge above caught her attention. Someone was observing. She sensed it. Not an individual. Something different. Her breath caught. Then she caught sight of him. High above, framed by the rising sun, Bracken stood motionless like a statue on the ridge. His left flank had a new welt, and his brown coat was speckled with ancient scars. He let out a quick, punctuation-like exhalation, and the wind seized his black mane. Their gazes met. Mia remained still. She remained silent. She was more aware. She just turned sideways, lowered her gaze, and slowly stood. "I'm not a threat," to use horse language. After a single stomp, Bracken turned and paced away, swerving through the fog like a ghost woven into the moor rather than fleeing. Mia let out a breath. Instead of posting the video to the channel that evening, she uploaded it to her personal archive. Not quite yet. She wasn't prepared to level charges without evidence. However, there was a problem. The timing, the anonymous tip, and the Stallion's actions weren't all by accident. She performed another GPS metadata run. A camera installed on the body was used to take the picture. Dependable, high resolution. Ashdown's unique file naming scheme was revealed via internal watermark traces. This was sent by someone inside. Someone who had access to the video. And who was doing it in spite of Lady Beatrice. It was more than a call for assistance. A whistleblower was involved. Another communication came 2 days later. This time, only a phrase instead of a video. They intend to put him under sedation. Tonight? Mia felt her heart race. She looked at local traffic reports. There has been no official report of any activity on the moor roads. However, that meant very little. There were off-grid, private routes on the Ashdown estate. And if the van they utilized was unmarked, nobody would be aware. Reaching for her phone, she dialed a number she hadn't spoken to in months. Oliver Kent, the voice went on. Crisp. Weary. RSPCA insignia. It's Mia, Oliver. I need assistance. Silently. A pause occurred. Is Ashdown at issue here? She blinked. Are you aware already? He remarked, I've been waiting for someone to confirm it. Come see me tomorrow. However, Mia? Take caution. They won't stop at sedation if they're taking shortcuts now. A lone figure moved down the slope that night as the fog slid low across the valley and the stars flickered out behind clouds. Bracken. His figure stopped close to a crevice in the stone wall, his ears perking up and down. Then he charged the border, bucking his head quickly. The wall broke. There were stones all over. They hammered their hooves. The stallion vanished, engulfed by the mist of Exmoor. But he wasn't running away this time. He was engaged in combat. A chill cut like a dagger across the heather as dawn broke. The fog had not dissipated over the old Exmoor hills, on the contrary, it had grown thicker, clinging low to the earth and obscuring both shape and sound. Overnight, the outlying grounds of Ashdown had lost their stone wall. A tiny opening had developed into a chasm large enough to let a mature horse charge through. That's exactly what Bracken had done. Mia gazed at the hoofprints pressed into the mud as she stood close to the wreckage. Fresh blood still slickened the sharp edges of the stone. As he pushed through, his shoulder must have snagged on the sharp rocks. However, he continued. Curving downhill, the route disappeared among the gorse and bracken. She tapped her phone while kneeling and taking pictures for documentation. Oliver Kent heard her say, I'm at the breach. He has left for the moor. He is also bleeding. Oliver remarked, I'll work with the local wildlife officers. Don't follow too closely, though. Mia, you're not prepared to step in on your own. I'm not getting involved, she declared. I'm watching. He let out a sigh. Just keep in mind that even well-intentioned observations can turn into disturbances, particularly during the foaling season. The Crow Act is indifferent to intent. She was aware of that. Strict safeguards were provided by the Countryside and Rights of Way Act, particularly on Exmoor. No cars. Drones cannot fly below 400 feet. Don't bother animals, even semi-feral ones. They might be the ones breaking the law if they make one mistake. 2 Ashdown Hall men were already riding ATVs parallel to the boundary track further south. Headlights flickered through the mist as their motors rumbled low. As Mia got closer, one of them slowed. His voice was muffled by a scarf as he continued, You don't belong out here. She answered, I'm a registered volunteer. And you're not on Ashdown's land. The man remained silent. After giving his radio a single tap, he revved his engine and started to head for the ridgeline. She continued to walk cautiously, staying on the public path that wound through the moor like a ribbon. She stopped every 100 yards to check for signs, such as bent grass, blood, or turned rocks. She discovered it, a scarlet stain across the moss where Bracken must have stumbled, at a shallow marshy dip. She paused. Quiet. Not a single bird's song. No wind. The only sound, drifting westward, is the hum of faraway engines. Then there was a flicker. Something moved far ahead, close to the torso's edge. She lifted her camera, held her breath, and zoomed in. He was there. Bracken. Raw shoulder, flanks rising and sinking, mud-caked. His head was up, ears pricked back, and he stood still. Observing. Listening. A tiny, silent drone hovered behind him. It was almost imperceptible save for the dim blinking light. Too low for legality. In another location, Oliver Kent was arguing into his phone while standing next to a marked RSPCA car. I'm telling you, their ATVs are off-path, and their drone is not meeting CAA altitude minimums. Sergeant Priya Malhotra, the head officer of the Wildlife Crime Unit, was the voice on the other line. Until there is an active risk or a confirmed injury to the animal, she stated, I cannot issue orders. You are aware of a war's limitations. Oliver stated, he is hurt. The shoulder should be cut. Perhaps deep. Additionally, they are attempting to retake him without permission. Malhotra answered, then I need timestamps and coordinates. I'll send a unit if you can provide me with proof. It was not a level moor. With each bend, it revealed and concealed everything as it rose and fell in waves. Boots slipping a little on the damp grass, Mia ascended the next incline. Her breath hitched as she got to the peak. Bracken was being funneled down toward a thicket by two ATV riders who had looped ahead, obviously off any legal course. From his equipment, one drew a long pole, a catch stick. Illegal for animals to roam freely. Hey! Mia yelled. Bracken was startled by the sound, but so was one of the horsemen, who spun around and charged at her. She tripped on the edge of a rock and staggered back. Mud splattered as the ATV swerved close. The rider continued. Simply sped by and vanished down the hill. Bracken shot off in the other direction, soaring like a ghost into the fog. With a gasp, she stumbled back to her feet. She had trembling hands. Her cell rang. Now, where are you? Oliver inquired. She claimed that they attempted to corner him. They came within 10 feet of me with that machine and brought a catch stick. Did you get any video? Indeed. It is now uploading. Stay put, he instructed. Police are on their way. Bracken continued to run till he came to a pine stand close to an ancient dry stream bed. He slowed there. Dark, sticky blood dripped down his shoulder. He breathed in sharp gasps. With heaving and shaky legs, he lowered his head. However, he remained upright. Then he pressed his head on a pine trunk in a methodical, almost purposeful motion. Only for a second. Just enough to allow his cheek to be scraped by the bark. One of the memories. A smell? Something untamed, something beyond boundaries. Sergeant Malhotra arrived on the location at nightfall, leaving her patrol unit with a notepad and a confident gait. She told Mia and Oliver, all right. Tell me everything. And play the video for me. With a steady but hushed voice, Mia handed up her phone. You should watch the scene where the drone hovers right over his head after dipping below 200 feet. Malhotra's jaw tensed as she watched the video again. All right, she replied. In accordance with the Moorland Welfare Protocol, we can establish a protective barrier based on this. I will also discuss the definition of free roaming with Ashdown's legal staff. She looked toward the horizon, where the fog was barely broken by the last of the sun's rays. She suggested, "Let's keep this animal out of captivity for one more night. Then, we follow the book." The moor was still damp, silent, and erratic, but the morning fog had lifted. The heather was bathed in a soft glow as a weak sun forced its way through the bank of clouds. Mia was crouching near a level patch of mossy ground just over a low ridge, forming a basic triangle with herself, a pail of water, and a netted bundle of hay at the farthest point, with her back to the ground and her knees bent and still. Her breath was the only sound borne by the wind. She took a deep breath through her nose and exhaled slowly, steadily, and deliberately every 20 seconds. Nothing to say. Not a move. No camera soaring overhead. Nothing except silence. Existence. Permission. An hour went by. One more. Then there was a rustle. Bracken appeared like a ghost, drawn forward by hunger out of the haze. He twitched his ears. One leg paused in midair. He stared at Mia's profile, alert but not moving. He didn't run away. He didn't snort. He waited. Mia did not blink. After lowering his head and sniffing the ground, Bracken moved forward a single step. One more. His hoofs hardly made a sound on the damp grass. There was a slight sheen of dried blood on the scar across his shoulder. When he got to the bucket of water, he stopped and dipped his muzzle. A soft slurp. Then another. Mia's throat constricted. She just listened without turning to observe. She wasn't the focus of this moment. It was about trust that was given rather than forced. After taking a big breath, Bracken went to the hay. Tension surged through their relationship, but it wasn't fear, rather, it was the energy of choice. His decision to remain. To consume. To refrain from running. A few minutes later, he turned to face Mia. She remained motionless, shoulders relaxed, hands freely resting on her thighs. He approached with a careful step. Then took a step back. That was sufficient. She later watched the video from her handheld field camera, which was fastened to a bush close by and was set very low with no zoom or motor. Everything was evident from the angle. Bracken deliberately approached, lowering his head without fear. After pausing the video, she focused on the side of his neck with her camera. A thin line. It was a scarred wound, not a new one. Round. A little higher. She leaned closer. A ring of pressure. She gripped the edge of her laptop tightly. It was identical to the looping method used in the training video that was leaked, in which Bracken was restrained by force and had his head dragged into an abnormal arc. Back then, the bruises were new. It was scar tissue now. She layered screenshots on top of another file. The placements were precisely the same. The same viewpoint. The same stallion. The same trauma that is characteristic. Evidence. She informed the vet registry's Dr. Rowan Mackay of her findings over the phone. He didn't have to say anything, so he kept quiet. Equine identification law regulations were unambiguous. If a horse needed medical attention, it had to be formally identified, microchipped, and allocated to a responsible owner. The catch, though, was this. There were no records of Bracken. Not a chip. No passport that is registered. Nevertheless, there was tangible proof that he had been handled, trained, and probably given medication. Although he warned her of the line, Rowan consented to review the pictures. It's grey area if he stays semi-feral and no one asserts legal ownership, he stated. But the law becomes very black and white if he is restrained or given medication. Mia knew what that implied. Bracken would legally lose his freedom if she pushed too quickly or if he required medication. She set up camp that night close to the ridge, visible but not close enough to crowd him. No fire was started by her. She simply put on a weatherproof bivy bag and allowed the cold to seep through her sleeves. Plumes rose from her breath. Sometimes she could hear him moving through the heather, snorting softly, and scuffing his hoofs on the ground. Now they shared a space. Not much more. However, that was momentous in the language of instinct and memory, of prey and predator. She just brought hay and water the following morning. She took a couple steps toward the supplies this time. Not very much. Just enough to make the room smaller. In 1 hour, Bracken was back. After a moment of hesitation, he crossed the invisible line. Mia stopped breathing when he got to the bucket of water. He took a sip. Then, startlingly, he moved in her direction. 1. 2. The edge of her jacket sleeve was touched by his muzzle. He took a whiff. Her arm was warmed by his breath. His ears remained at ease. And then the unthinkable. With a gentle breath, he pressed his cheek against her shoulder. Mia remained still. It wasn't fear that caused her eyesight to blur. Not even from victory. But due of its weight. The distinction. The faith. It was Sergeant Malhotra who called later that afternoon. Though curt, her voice was inquisitive. She stated, "Lady Beatrice has hired a lawyer. They're spreading the myth that Bracken is a rogue who escaped during a legal trial and is now putting other people in danger." Mia said, "He's not dangerous." "Not to you?" "However, to them. Bad press results from a wild stallion that defies authority." "Were they able to register him?" "No. Defra's equestrian system has nothing. No proprietor. Not a microchip. He seems to be non-existent." Mia turned her gaze to the moor, where Bracken stood in profile against the lowering sun, his dignity untarnished despite scars across his shoulder and wind catching his mane. She muttered, "Oh, he exists. Greater than what they do." A surge of wind ripped through the gorse bushes that night, raising her tarp and rattling limbs. Mia saw movement on the ridge and stretched out to pin it down. 2 shadows. Human? She lowered down and switched off her headlight. Unnaturally, a low hum rose in the distance. A drone? It moved gently overhead, scanning. Mia's heart pounded as she pressed flat to the earth. They were not going to give up. They were waiting and observing. Preparing their next action. The sluggish grind of tires on gravel was carried by the wind as it switched in the middle of the morning and swept eastward across the moor, thinning the mist. With one inconspicuous RSPCA car, one marked police 4x4, and a sleek black Range Rover with the Ashdown crest behind it, the convoy arrived without much fuss. Lady Beatrice Ashdown was the first to leave. Trench coat with a tailored fit. Gloves made of leather in burgundy. Hat with a wide brim secured with a mother-of-pearl clasp. Her face was inscrutable, like marble cut into politeness. She avoided glancing toward the moor. She gave Mia a look. A man in a neat grey suit behind her leaned in to mumble something while adjusting his suitcase. Probably legal advice. Sergeant Priya Malhotra calmly and precisely shut the door of her vehicle across the clearing. With her badge visible and her field tablet tucked under one arm, she walked up. "Lady Ashdown," was her flat greeting. Beatrice nodded back, clipped, "Sergeant. I recognize that there have been anomalies. The Animal Welfare Act of 2006 may have been violated," Malhotra stated. "And we're determining whether your operation has involved the unlawful pursuit or sedation of livestock." Beatrice laughed, softly and elegantly. "I promise that Ashdown Hall complies with the law. Our program for the welfare of horses has been praised." However, Malhotra added, the horse in question isn't registered in any DEFRA databases. Additionally, video evidence points to coercive training techniques that are outside accepted norms. Beatrice's attorney came out with a composed yet forceful tone. My client is not required to answer these implications in an open field unless charges are being filed. That's right, Malhotra affirmed. For this reason, we are setting up a perimeter. With immediate effect, the Exmoor group that includes the Stallion Bracken will be surrounded by a no-contact buffer zone. Within 200 meters of that group, no ATVs, drones, or Ashdown Hall employees are allowed. Beatrice's mouth clenched. She declared, "This is still common land." Malhotra reminded her that it was covered by the Countryside and Rights of Way Act. This involves safeguarding cattle and wildlife from persecution. Until further notice, you will continue to be outside the moor boundary. Sitting on a foldable stool close to her field equipment, Mia remained in the rear during the conversation. Her hands were occupied changing the batteries in her camera, but her ears were alert. Standing next to her with his arms folded, Oliver Kent's eyes scanned the horizon like a guy keeping an eye out for storm clouds. He said, she believed she could steamroll it. Mia remarked, she's not used to anyone saying no. Oliver pivoted. How is Bracken doing? Eating. Observing. Restoring health. Has he yet to let you to touch him? Nearly. He gave a faint smile. That is the biggest thing that frightens her, he stated. Not the video. The press, no. The fact that you reached him without using any force. A group from the RSPCA started recording the region in the middle of the afternoon using long-lens cameras and a laser rangefinder to mark distance. Every action was recorded. Mia provided GPS tracks demonstrating that ATV trails had entered prohibited areas and time-stamped video of drone infractions from the previous evening. Along the temporary boundary, a wildlife officer placed laminated signs at regular intervals. Protected zone, no unauthorized entry. No motorized vehicles. No drone flights at low altitudes. Violations will result in legal action. The signs signified everything, despite their diminutive size in comparison to the moor's grandeur. Dr. Rowan Mackay showed there later that day, carrying a medical pack over one shoulder as he hiked in from the opposite side. He offered to help and met Mia near the crest. He looked at Bracken and said, "You weren't exaggerating." The stallion's body was angled sideways to catch the light as it stood on a modest incline. His wound was still inflamed even after it had healed. Near it, flies hovered. Mia said, "He's moving better. I'm still unable to close." "I'll evaluate from here," Rowan remarked. "No medications yet. However, we will have to begin the equine ID procedure if we must treat him." Mia gave a nod. "His freedom would be terminated," she stated. "Yes, legally. We then wait?" Rowan gave her a sidelong glance. "Mia, you're playing a risky game." "I understand." As the sun began to drop, Beatrice stayed by her car as her crew disassembled. With her gloved hands neatly clasped in front of her, she silently observed the moor. Mia came slowly, methodically, and halted at the perimeter tape. "Leave him alone," she advised. Beatrice avoided eye contact with her. She answered, "Before you were born, I raised horses. I am aware of what breaks them." "That's the issue," Mia stated. "You anticipate them shattering." Beatrice turned at last. There was no warmth in her hard, colorless eyes. "This is not over," she muttered. "Not by any means." "No," Mia concurred. "It's only the beginning." Malhotra formally started an animal welfare file that evening. Statements were filed by RSPCA authorities. Logs from drones were retrieved. Curious yet wary, local reporters started to follow the tale. In the midst of it all, Bracken stood beneath a single hawthorn tree, the moor extending out in front of him while the wind pulled at his mane. He had no idea which documents were signed. He had no idea what perimeter zones were. However, he sensed the change. Reduced stress. More silence. And he had no one after him for the first time in weeks. Within 12 hours, the picture became viral. It wasn't noteworthy. It wasn't explicit. It was a single still photograph of Bracken standing half-wrapped in violet fog, one ear forward, one hind leg relaxed, the standard position of a horse not engaged in combat. The photograph was taken at sunrise by a local amateur hiker. When Sarah Llewellyn, a seasoned local journalist who had been delving into unimportant agricultural scandals for the past 2 years, saw the picture, her spine tingled. She sent a caption that was just the right amount of defiance and devotion, and she asked for permission to publish it. Some animals flee in order to live. Others remain motionless for observation. The article was on trending news charts within a day. It was reposted on animal rights blogs. The clip was requested by a national morning show. Comments began to pour in under Mia's channel, where she had just uploaded an instructive video called "Respect the Moor, Don't Chase the Story." People wanted to assist. Then, people began to arrive. First, by the dozens. Then hundreds. Campers. Dog walkers. Drone enthusiasts. Activists. Influencers searching for the next chance to become viral. Mothers pushing strollers. Retired people wearing binoculars. Even a bunch of teenage girls from Bristol brought placards that said "Free Bracken" and were glittering. Using hashtags to frame their picnics, they erect tents along the moor's public access margins. Near the stone ridge where Mia used to observe in peace, a temporary camp was established. Conversations, portable speakers, dogs barking, and the occasional humming of drones over the altitude limit filled the air now. With a weight that became heavier by the hour, Mia watched it all play out. There was no animosity. It was zeal. It was noisy, though. Furthermore, Bracken was no longer there. Mia paced the perimeter's edge and called Oliver, saying, "He hasn't eaten in 24 hours. The hay is unaltered. He will not return to the watering locations. I am aware that he has ventured farther onto the moor." Oliver said, "I'll look through the drone logs. However, we forewarned them about this. Attention is reciprocal." As a couple passed by holding hands and looking out toward the horizon while holding a GoPro on a selfie stick, she turned. "Oh God," she muttered, "they have no idea what they're doing." Oliver answered, "They believe they're assisting. However, this isn't a protest. It's a pilgrimage. Moreover, it is frightening him away." Mia was standing on a homemade platform made out of a pallet and 2 bales of hay about lunchtime. Curious, a small group of people gathered with cameras up. She spoke into a windshield microphone that was connected to a tiny PA and tapped the microphone that was fastened to her collar. "Don't chase Bracken if you care about him," she stated coolly. The crowd moved. "He's not interested in your apples. Your signs are not understood by him. When 100 people are pointing cameras at him, he doesn't feel comfortable." A pause. Then she went on. "It's not a zoo on the moor. It's not a place for protests. He calls it home. We all have the right to be here under the Crow Act, but not to harass, corner, or meddle." She pointed to the signs that were laminated along the walkway. "Don't let your dogs go loose. Remain behind the designated posts. Let it be his decision if he chooses to show himself, not yours." There was a clap. Others joined. It wasn't really loud. However, it was sufficient. Sarah Llewellyn discovered Mia close to the crest later that night as the crowd dispersed. Sarah handed her a folder of old clippings and said, "I need to show you something. Newsprint that has become yellow. Photographs with grain. A brief obituary for Thorn, a 12-year-old Exmoor horse who was supposedly put down following a spontaneous injury sustained during a behavioral trial and who had previously belonged to Ashdown Hall's training section. According to Sarah, it was 14 months ago. They didn't record any attempts at treatment. No veterinary record. DEFRA has not been warned. Furthermore, no microchip was ever registered." Mia's heart was pounding as she turned the pages. "Do you believe Bracken was a member of the same group?" Sarah remarked, "I believe he survived something Thorn didn't. And nobody was meant to find out." Mia sat by herself that night, leaning her back against the chilly stone wall and keeping her notebook open. Below, the faraway campfires blazed like stars. Fragments of voices floated, some doubtful, some joyous. She considered how easily focus may shift. How, in the event that things didn't work out, the same hands that held banners could take up rope. How brittle trust was. Beyond the reach of lanterns, she gazed out onto the black and silent moor. Bracken watched, or waited, somewhere out there. Or roamed, trying to understand the humans who bombarded his environment with mechanical eyes in the sky, static, and scent trails while claiming to protect him. He had tasted tranquility. He was now discovering the consequences of fame. Mia went back to the final feeding station she had set up at dawn. The pail of water remained half-filled. The dew had soaked the hay. However, something had changed. A solitary footprint of mud. Not walked on. Not dispersed. Intentional? Just outside the supply circle, pressed. And beside it, hooked on a twig, was the tiniest tip of a mane hair. Bracken was present. It's close enough to touch. He hadn't stayed either. At night, the moor was a different place. Not a banner. No cameras. No inquisitive murmurs. Only wind, persistent and rude, trailing like a warning through the heather. The perimeter signs waved silently past midnight. There were no stars or moonlight, and the fog was heavy. The sheep were motionless, too. The hum followed. Low, steady, mechanical, too intentional to be natural, too smooth to be wind. A drone? Without navigation lights, infrared equipped, and buzzing in slow arcs, slightly below the legal limit. As if it knew where to look, it moved. 2 ATV units scuttled along farther downhill, their tires barely depressed enough to reduce their pressure over the moss. No headlights. There are no plates in sight. Logos are covered in black paint. A figure sat erect and poised behind the leading vehicle. Ashdown, Lady Beatrice. She scanned the thermal feed on the drone's monitor while wearing thick riding gloves and a black wool coat. The far side of the screen was dotted with bright spots that might have been foxes, badgers, or rabbits. Then there was a flash of movement close to an area of ancient bramble. Shaped like a horse. Bigger than the others. She leaned closer. "There," she said in a whisper. "Now go." The ATV roared. The heat bloom was captured on a motion sensor at a park surveillance pull-out station 2 miles south. A blink of red light. Flagged are the coordinates. The blurry outline of the cars crossing the outer barrier was captured by Camera 9 when it automatically turned on. The Wildlife Crimes Unit received the alert after 3 minutes. When the call came in, Sergeant Malhotra sat up in bed. "Verified intrusion?" she asked, putting on her boots already. "Yes, ma'am." 2 ATVs. An infrared drone. No activity was reported. "Send Whitfield and Kent the coordinates," she said. "I'll be there in 20 minutes." In her tent, Mia was already half conscious. She could immediately identify the tiny hum that had reached her ears, which sounded like tinnitus. The sound of purpose. Something surgical, instead of the bustle of curiosity from previous groups. She took her flashlight and camera, slid out of her sleeping bag, and started walking stealthily toward the North Ridge. She hasn't yet given Oliver a call. She required evidence. She froze as she reached the top of the ridge. Headlights far below flickered on, then off. 2 figures with poles outstretched hurried across the field. A rig for capturing. Lightweight netting. Canisters of chemical sedatives. She lifted her camera, and began to record. Just ahead of them, Bracken's figure could be seen in the thermal lens, his nostrils wide, his ears flat, and his hooves backward. A red dot above his shoulder blinked silently as the drone hovered straight overhead. He ran off to the left. However, the topography was against him, a small gorse and bracken dip impeded his path. After slipping once and clambering to his feet, he sprinted westward, curving upward. One of the men pursued. "Stop him!" Someone gave a hiss. "Beatrice." A net swung wide as Bracken neared the top of the slope, but he missed it and tangled in a shrub. He didn't hold off. His shoulder, which was already healing, ripped open again as he tumbled through stone and thorn, brush cutting at his side. Mia managed to record the sound, which included a huge thump, a deep grunt, and hoofs that quickly faded into the darkness. The drone faltered in midair and attempted to track Bracken, but he disappeared once more, disappearing into the moor's ancient folds. The perimeter was sealed up an hour later. All access trails were blocked by police cars. The fog was swept by flashlights. With a fixed gaze, Sergeant Malhotra stood next to Mia, watching the video on her tablet. She said that they had done more than simply breach the protected zone. They deployed a drone under 200 feet after dark, used restricted equipment, and planned a capture attempt without a permit. Mia said, "Beatrice was there. In person." "I saw," said Malhotra. "And we have the complete record this time." Oliver Kent showed there, his face white in the early morning light. It appeared as though he had not slept for a week. "They've gone too far," he declared. "No other suggestions. No more cautions." It was quiet back at Ashdown Hall. With her coat still zipped and her gloves on, Lady Beatrice sat in her study. With a stern voice, her lawyer paced next to the fireplace. "They have timestamps for drones. Park monitoring. Police bodycam footage." She didn't respond. He remarked, "You issued the order yourself. You will be charged by them." Beatrice looked to the window, where the sun was just starting to rise through the frost on the glass. "They'll forget," she muttered. "They always do." However, she lacked confidence in her voice. There was more in it. Resignation. Kent turned in a secret file to his boss that afternoon. It contained a collection of internal emails, GPS records, and one audio clip from a trainer's locker room recording, Beatrice's clear voice giving clear instructions to get the rogue before public sympathy gets irreparable. A brief synopsis was included. Intentional breach of welfare protocol under a war 2006. He pressed the transmit button. After that, he shut down his laptop and relaxed. Trembling hands. Mia went back up on the ridge. She discovered blood this time. It is only a footpath, not pools. A smudge along a broken rock's base. Bark snagged hair. Indications of motion. Indications of discomfort. She stopped after following it as far as she dared. She discovered something else close to the edge of a thicket. A mud print. New. The slow exhale she had previously experienced was next to it. She pivoted. Bracken was standing 30 feet away, his eyes wide, his coat lathered, one leg favoring the other, and he was still panting. He didn't flee. He did not make a charge. He remained there long enough for her to carefully lift one hand and drop it again, but not long enough to get near. Nothing to say. Simply take a breath. Shed. The wind across Exmoor had become strong and dry by late morning. From ridge to ridge, the sky hung low, a flat grey ceiling. With her heart pounding at every form that moved through the mist, Mia sat silently on a chilly stone outcrop and used binoculars to search the moor. Then she noticed it. From the briar trail below, Bracken came up limping but upright, his ears alert, his walk regulated, and his flank still smeared with dried blood. He did not fully bear his weight on his right foreleg, which touched lightly. It wasn't a devastating injury yet. If left untreated, however, it may result in infection, lameness, or even worse. She let out a breath, got to her feet carefully, and started putting the portable vet kit together. 2 minutes later, Dr. Rowan Mackay arrived behind her with a crunch of gravel, muddy boots, a windbreaker zipped to his neck, and a silent nod that substituted for a hello. "He's here," Mia murmured. "Below the hollow?" With a steady breath, Rowan lowered the scope after looking through it. "Remains mobile. That's encouraging. Let's keep things simple." They came downwind from the south side, cautious to remain unseen and unthreatening. Mia was the first to move, her arms hanging loosely. Rowan trailed after with a portable bowl of clean water, an antiseptic solution, and a roll of bandages. Bracken remained motionless as he watched them approach. He remained motionless, not out of terror but in thought. Slowly, his sides heaved. His gaze followed their steps. Then something changed when Mia knelt down by the bowl and poured the water without looking at him. He took a step forward. One limb. Then another. That is, until he was less than 10 feet away. She remained silent. Didn't flinch. Just gently held out one arm, palm up. With a gentleness that nearly broke her, Bracken bent his head and pressed his muzzle against her forearm. Rowan merely nodded once without saying anything. "I'm entering." He moved slowly and methodically, never right behind or too quickly, as he circled. As Rowan examined the wound, which was extensively torn along the shoulder line but not deep enough for stitches, Mia stayed motionless, a firm anchor. The swelling tissue was probably more deeply injured than it looked. "No medication," Rowan whispered. "No tranquilizer. No antibiotics. Unless you wish to initiate the ID procedure, that is." Mia tightened her jaw. She was aware of the legislation. Any medication supplied, even topical, must be registered in accordance with the 2018 Equine Identification Regulations. Microchip? Passport? Possession? It meant that he would no longer be a stallion that roamed freely. Paperwork was required. Custody. Cages. She gazed directly into Bracken's eyes. He wasn't pleading for help. He was requesting deference. Sterile water and a mild antiseptic solution that didn't need to be reported were used to clean the wound. With quiet accuracy, Rowan patted lightly without applying pressure. Though he flinched once, Bracken did not run. Mia simply breathed with him without saying anything. Rowan took a step back when it was finished. "I can only do that much," he remarked. "Unless it gets worse." "What if it does?" Mia inquired. He averted his gaze for a second. "After that, we either mark him or let it happen naturally. Give him a chip." be his owner. That meant something to each of them. Mia kept a thorough journal that night at base camp, including the time spent caring for the wound, the supplies used, and the closeness. She sent it to Kent and Malhotra after signing and scanning it. Complete openness? There is no grey area. Additionally, she posted a single image to her YouTube community tab, with no title or caption, simply a clean image of Bracken's side with the blood gone and the cut visible but not threatening. He was aware, not shocked, with his head tilted slightly and his eyes fixed on the lens. The picture was self-explanatory. It spread through forums, non-profit organizations, and rescue pages in a matter of hours. Because of dignity, not because of drama. The kind that, up until now, had been denied to him. Mia returned to the ridge at morning with hay and water in tow, but this time she had neither a camera nor a kit, just her presence. Near the hollow's edge, Bracken approached her with a steady but irregular pace and a softly flicking tail. With her hands in her lap and her legs crossed, she took a seat in the grass. He approached gently. Then he put his head down and delicately pressed it on her shoulder for the first time. She refrained from crying. Didn't say anything? The whole trust of a creature that had been chased, restrained, almost broken, but never given up, only closed her eyes as the weight of it fell gently upon her. Kent sent additional registry findings that afternoon. As it turned out, Bracken had previously been named as trial male number 3 in an old Ashdown spreadsheet, as part of an unrecorded behavioral program that was never reported to DEFRA. There was no microchip ID on the document. Not a physical description. No year of birth. Only a date, the initials of a former trainer, and a project code. It coincided with Thorne's death week. He was more than just crazy. They had obliterated him. Malhotra was going over the materials while standing at her mobile command desk. She let out a sigh after giving her stylus a single tap. They are unable to claim him, she stated. Not in a legal sense. No more? Who can, then? Kent inquired. Nobody, she answered. And that's what matters. He decides what occurs next. Mia went up to Bracken again that night, but this time she was just walking, not feeding or treating him. She entered the moor and stopped. He trailed behind. A leisurely pace. Adjacent to one another. As they walked through the beautiful field together, the light fell on the scar on his shoulder. Untamed. Not possessed? I just got it. They delivered the official notice by hand. One envelope, unmarked save for a block-type printed line and a wax seal. Notice of undertaking, Ashdown Estate, Animal Welfare Investigation. The words were definitive, clinical, and dry within. Ashdown Hall and its associates were ordered to stop contacting, containing, or interfering with any member of the semi-feral Exmoor herd, including but not limited to the Stallion Bracken, immediately. Drones, ATVs, employees, volunteers, outside contractors, and monitoring systems were all part of this. Sections 4 and 9 of the Animal Welfare Act of 2006 stipulate that a violation of the undertaking will lead to accelerated prosecution. Lady Beatrice Ashdown's face was inscrutable as she read the document once and then again. While adjusting his tie, the lawyer next to her remained silent. Nothing else could be said. Meanwhile, a silver SUV with RSPCA insignia entered Ashdown Hall's upper gravel path. Officers emerged carrying a mobile case with inspection instruments, clipboards, and a digital scanner. Shortly after, Dr. Rowan Mackay showed there as a separate observer. Wide B-roll footage of the estate's famous stables was captured by a BBC correspondent who remained discreetly at a distance. The barn doors creaked open to reveal spotless stalls with mirror-polished steel bars and cedar chips on the walls. Everything appeared to be ideal on the surface. Cleaned. Organized. Costly. The logs, however, revealed a different tale. With a frown, Kent leafed through one of the training diaries. He whispered, "Half of these entries are copy-pasted. There are no timestamps. No initials. Only checkmarks. A series of wall shackles that were partially obscured by a tack curtain was indicated by Rowan. He declared, "These aren't for saddle breaking. Their purpose is containment." They took pictures of everything. Time-stamped. Labeled. Records and supply inventories were compared. There were 2 ampoules missing from one set of injectable sedatives, and the treatment book had no corresponding entry. One inspector said, "The chain of custody is broken." Beatrice folded her arms and stood in the doorway. She remained silent for once. Mia avoided the news once she was back on the moor. She needed to keep up her own customs. She brought fresh hay and water every morning. She didn't have to watch him eat anymore. Now, Bracken came right up to her, frequently getting close enough for her to feel the warmth of his shoulder next to her knee. She refrained from petting him. Didn't take the lead. Didn't mention anything aloud. Simply went for a walk. Waited. Reliable. Malhotra's team finished the initial inspection summary on the 3rd day of the project and sent it to DEFRA and the RSPCA. Ashdown Hall's training license should be suspended, at least temporarily, based on sufficient evidence. The results weren't unexpected. However, Ashdown's media staff remained silent. Interviews with Beatrice were non-existent. Released no statements. Didn't say no. That stillness was transformed into a front-page spread by Sarah Llewellyn. The Price of Power: How a Quiet Stallion Destroyed a Noisy Tradition. It was no longer all about Bracken. It was about a single animal, who refused to compromise everything Ashdown had based its brand on, including discipline, control, and legacy. Mia did a single, brief, unedited interview. She made no mention of Beatrice. Avoided discussing the investigation. She discussed space. Time, too. And how once trust is lost, it can only be restored with silence rather than effort. If someone has been harmed, sometimes the best thing we can do for them is to stop trying to fix them, she remarked. An animal behavior podcast picked up the clip after it was broadcast on local channels. In just 1 week, it received over 1 million views. Beatrice stood by herself on Ashdown Hall's back balcony that night, holding the undertaking notice in one hand and a glass of water in the other. A public apology had been suggested by her attorney. Her board had requested a plan for minimizing harm. The drone footage from 2 weeks prior, however, was all she could hear: the thump of hooves, the tear of flesh, and the subsequent hush. She hadn't anticipated opposition. Not from the general public. Not from the equine. She believed that suffering would exhaust him. Bracken, however, had maintained the line. And now everything under her control was sliding, slowly and quietly, rather than in a flame. The letter was folded in half by her. But then again. And let it fall into the flames. It was quiet outside on the moor. Bracken was standing close to the stone wall where, weeks before, he had initially broken through. There was no more blood. The previous walkway was overgrown with grass. However, the scar on his shoulder was still there, not irate, just there. Mia stood close by, her arms crossed and her gaze fixed on the horizon. She remained silent. She didn't have to. Bracken approached her slowly, one step at a time, until he was standing next to her in the open, free of fences, watchers, halters, and claims. From the west, a breeze blew over their shoulders and through the heather. Additionally, for the first time since the beginning, There was silence. Very quiet. The last gate was not composed of metal or wood. On the western crest of Exmoor, where the moor spread out wild and wide into the centre of the commons, there was a crack in the dry stone wall. No indications. No posts. A faded hoof-worn trail curves into the heather beyond, and there's only a plain wooden stile to the left. They had decided to allow it to occur here. Not a ceremony. Not a press. Don't use drones. Only one open area. And a decision? Mia got there before dawn. All she had in her back pocket was a little laminated card that said, "Notice of release, voluntary rewilding, Section 3.6 of the Semi-Feral Equine Management Protocol." Essentially, it was a permission slip to vanish. Bracken would not be taken, shipped, adopted, or housed until he chose to approach a handler after today, according to a written declaration. Every oversight would be removed. No more concern. No more feedings. No more limits. He stayed, if he did. No one would follow him if he went. The wind blew hair across her cheek as she stood close to the gate, hands tucked in her jacket. First pink, then orange, then white, the horizon gleamed. Bracken came out of the ridge above, moving steadily but slowly. No limp? No saddle markings. No scars from halters. Only his breath, his body, and his will. When he spotted her, he stopped. Between them, the wind blew. He wasn't called by Mia. Remained motionless. She waited. Allowing whatever was necessary to be carried by the air. He took a step forward. Just one hoof. Then another. The hollow resonated with the crunch of stone. Like he had done 1,000 times before, he approached her, but this time there was no bucket of water. Not even a light brushing. Antiseptic is not waiting. Just her. The wind as well. When he paused 3 feet away, she took the laminated card out of her pocket and read it out loud as needed, slowly and gently. This release is entirely voluntary. Unless the animal exhibits medical distress or behaves in a way that endangers public safety, no additional action will be taken. You can leave now? After folding the card and putting it away, she moved to the side. Bracken remained still. A minute went by. Perhaps more. Then he ignored her. In the direction of the opening. The smell of faraway cattle drifted in from the west as the wind struck again, this time with more vigor. Out there, the terrain was older, harsher, and less frequently patrolled. In the gorse, wild horses moved like whispers, and unless you knew where to look, you could hardly see their tracks. Bracken moved slowly toward the direction of the opening. Then came to a standstill. Went back. He looked into her eyes without asking or begging. Only acknowledgement. And more. Appreciation. Or maybe, goodbye. Mia held her breath. Then, without warning, he turned, trotted toward the wide moor, and stepped through the opening. No stops. No looks back. A single flash of movement, with the body moving like ink across a spotless paper, the hoofs slapping moss, and the tail trailing after him like a rebellious flag. Over the hill, he vanished. Lost. The moment was taken from 2 ridges away by a wildlife officer using a long lens camera. No tags for identification. Not branded. No meddling? Only one static image, a blurry Mustang sprinting into the wind with nothing to stop him. That picture would hang in the RSPCA office near the Ashdown, resolve file cabinet later that week. Mia remained till the sun had risen completely. The direction of the wind had shifted. It was chilly, fresh, and honest now, and it came from the west. With her arms folded and her jacket zipped, she perched on the wall close to the gate. She refrained from crying. Then no. Only gazed out into the broad space where he had disappeared. Not because it was painful. However, she was aware that the pain was a contributing factor. That's what it feels like to let go with dignity. Not triumph. Not a loss. Nothing at all. A trio of Exmoor ponies were captured on camera 3 days later as they passed an ancient streambed to the west in a small herd. One was bigger than the others, deeper in hue, with a low, purposeful walk and a noticeable shoulder scar. Bracken. He wasn't in charge. He wasn't alone, though. The video was logged, time-stamped, and annotated with a straightforward message. Reintegration was observed, the subject behaves normally in the group. It was his file's final formal entry. After then, the file was closed. Nothing more. The stables at Ashdown Hall were silent. There was nobody in the training yard. It had been more than a week since Lady Beatrice was last spotted in public. The remaining trainers had started making changes to the facility, such as retiring the pressure poles, taking down the steel rigs, and switching from a feed schedule to pasture rotation. They didn't have to. Since they desired to. Sometimes one refusal to bend is all that is required. With the laminated card nestled beneath a stone paperweight, Mia sat at her desk. The footage of Bracken disappearing into the heather and over the ridge was the one she played 3 times. It wasn't uploaded by her. Didn't publish it. Simply kept it. Similar to a pledge. She then selected the right to choose as the title of a blank document and started writing. 6 weeks after the gate was opened, the Bracken Fund held its inaugural meeting. No cameras. Not a press. A laminated mission statement tacked to a corkboard beneath the window, a few dozen folding chairs, and a big wood table inside the village council hall. To fund transparent welfare reform in rural training facilities, educate the public on crow compliance, and preserve the autonomy of semi-feral equines on Exmoor. With the notebook she had kept with her since the day she first saw Bracken's eyes in that blurry film, Mia sat close to the end of the table. On the other side of her, Rowan Mackay went over the procedures for veterinary access while an RSPCA liaison completed the budget for the first year of monitoring. To aid in the establishment of the first field station, Sarah Llewellyn contributed her whole feature commission from The Guardian. Once holding glittering placards, a group of young Bristol students now managed the fund's social media accounts. They changed the message from Free Bracken to something more subdued and powerful: respect their choice. Now the fund was real. A recollection, but more than that. Not for a second. A framework. A standalone item. Upon returning to the moor, the terrain spread out in all directions, interspersed with distant groups of horses. Seasonal mobility patterns were captured via trail cams. The health of the herd seemed to be constant. 3 weeks prior, a healthy, inquisitive, and courageous young foal had been born. Days or even weeks passed with no recorded sighting of Bracken. Then, as usual, something appeared. A group of footprints close to the stream bed. A limb of a bramble broke. A scarred shadow seen by a hiker in the early morning. He was present. He just no longer needed to be noticed. That was the main idea. Slowly, Ashdown Hall altered. Silently. However, things changed. The steel rigs were taken out completely. Trainers received new credentials that prioritized observation over intervention, stress-free settings, and behavioral choice. In collaboration with the Bracken Fund and DEFRA compliance assessments, the estate redirected its attention from performance training to rehabilitation programs for wounded or elderly horses. After being suspended, the license was reissued with stringent conditions, including frequent inspections, complete openness, and a public reporting system that would have previously made Lady Beatrice laugh. However, Lady Beatrice stopped scoffing. She didn't visit the estate. The documents still bore her name. However, she was no longer in charge of daily operations. She had resigned. Not with much fanfare. However, with finality. She was last seen in the public eye in a blurry local snapshot taken at the edge of a pull-out pasture in Devon. She didn't have pearls, gloves, or jeans on. In a round enclosure, she and a young gelding were the only ones observing one another without halters. There were no captions posted. Nobody had to. Mia kept walking by herself across the meadow. Occasionally, with water. With a notebook, occasionally. Frequently with absolutely nothing. She stopped searching for Bracken. However, occasionally, when the wind was favorable and the grass shifted slightly enough to whisper, she would sense that someone was observing. Not tense. Not even close. Just be mindful. And she would grin because he had the right to be far away, not because he was close. The gift was that. After the fund was approved, Mia was questioned in a last interview, which was a silent podcast, taped late at night. What do you believe caused everything to change? Why did the pattern change? She hesitated. Then stated. Nothing was damaged. He remained intact. That's what made the difference. First came autumn, then winter. After that, thaw. Once more, the cycle started. Foals are born. Old mares withered. The moor changed yet remained constant. Outside the ridge, the stone wall where Bracken had previously pushed his way through was still scarred. No fixes. Not a plaque. Only the space. And freedom beyond it. A child on a walking route one afternoon asked her father what the hole in the wall was used for. After giving it some thought, the man said, "Someone picked the wild there." That spring, the Bracken Fund grew by adding 2 additional educational facilities, a mobile app for responsible access to moors, and a collaboration with nearby landowners to strengthen areas designated for passive observation. It was not ostentatious at all. It was all slow. It was steady, though. Rooted. Similar to hoofprints that remain visible in the rain. And the response was never straightforward when someone questioned why it was so important, why one unknown, unregistered stallion had started it all. However, it was consistently the same. Because when they thought he would fall, he stood. Because when they attempted to stop him, he continued walking. Because he didn't blink and instead met their eyes. And above all, for he could never again be denied existence.